the reasons I love artists is because they become obsessed with things that other people would never even think to think about. Seth Price is a contemporary artist based in New York who, in addition to making paintings that hang on the wall, has also designed a fashion line, written a novel, made music, and participated in contemporary culture in dynamic, exciting, and sometimes frankly confusing ways. Seth Price is undeniably one of the coolest people I have ever met. We conversed about the allure of being unavailable, the power of defocused thinking, creating a soundtrack for artists, hashtag menswear, and skin. It's a rainy day in New York, and I don't know, that always seems, usually for me, like rain and fall is kind of melancholic, but somehow, like last night, I flew in from Zurich to London and London here, and it was a little bit turbulent, and I usually hate that too, but somehow like the turbulence and the rain both felt like, I don't know, alivening to me.
Mm-hmm. It's like driving off-road.
Something like that, or just like, I don't know, something that usually is uncomfortable, feeling somehow like not comfortable, but just, it's almost like a pinch.
Yeah, because it's just about time fall like finally comes around.
Mm-hmm.
I love this cool temperature.
Yeah, I think it's good. So I wanted to talk to you about your practice in a really broad way, and then circle around to talking about the painting show that's going to be at the museum too. So
Mm-hmm.
So when you're not making art, like right now, for example, what are you thinking about?
Right now, meaning in this room right now?
Yeah.
What am I thinking
like getting
about?
micro and then getting, like pulling back from that.
Yeah. Well, this room is all about art.
Yeah.
We're sitting here in, the office in a gallery, and we're talking about art. So, and I'm kind of like, I'm like taxiing the plane onto the runway to talk about art momentarily. When I'm not thinking about art.
Yeah, like what else are you interested in?
Music.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm, I've got this SoundCloud of mixes that I've been making for the last 2 years. Just kind of, it's a way to be with music, kind of like let it pass through me, repackage it, send it back out for other people.
So is that what plays when I've been in the studio?
I mean, no, we're probably just playing whatever, random music.
Because I have noticed the music every time I've been there.
Yeah, no, I think it's, I love all music. So it's just something that's always going there. Yeah.
So the SoundCloud mixes that you're putting together, do they have titles?
They do.
Okay.
Yeah, all the titles are all about an hour long. The playlist with about 30 mixes now is called Soundtracks for Artists. I mean, it was kind of a corny joke, but I just thought, like, I know a lot of people who like to listen to music when they're in their studio, like banging their head on the wall. So I'm just messing around, like get interested in something, research it, listen to a lot of music, start throwing it together, mix it together into a single track, pile stuff on top of other stuff, slow it down, cut it up. It's like, music, when it became fully digital and streamable and everywhere, it's just like jumping into a bath, and the value of it starts to approach zero in a certain way. So then it's trying to find a way to get back into it and be with it in a way that's not about a streaming platform or about watching YouTube videos and YouTube playlists. It's active. It activates me. It makes me like pick up the music in my hands and kind of smush it together and think about it. And I'm not making my own music right now. I do sometimes, but thinking about other things, but I still want to be in touch with it and like consume it and produce it and eat it and be with it.
Well, I think a lot about this because like I try and be present and notice things, right? And I remember being in Tel Aviv at Thanksgiving and hearing a song in the cafe that I walked over to buy breakfast for my family, and then for me, the way that I could access it again was I remembered a few of the lyrics and then I could search the lyrics and then figure out, who,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Such a great tool.
So,
Love that.
right. And then even this morning, there was a version of, I can't get no satisfaction. And then I was like, I think that's Cat Power, but I'm not sure. And
Yeah,
then
she does that song.
amazing, right? So I listened to that, a couple times this morning, and that sort of set my mood for the day, right? Because I don't have an ability to necessarily remember like a musical line, but I can remember the words because that's my point of access.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great album. That Cat Power album. It takes me back to a long time ago, listening to that a lot, around 2000 or something.
Yeah. And music, I feel like scent, can transport me and I think other people like through time in a way that's more accessible sometimes for people than art is, because it's somehow more visceral.
Yeah, music's like the best art form in a lot of ways, as far as I'm concerned.
So when you were talking about like how readily accessible it is, and then that kind of turns into like a way of negating it.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that let's say I never heard of Cat Power, and I go home after this interview and instantly download everything she's ever recorded, right? I mean, so there's no point I don't think, in collecting music anymore, unless you're talking about records, vinyl packaged products. But the music itself, now if everything's available, it makes you think about it differently. I think that's what I was talking about. And because I could then go home, get every album in about an hour or 10 minutes, depending on less, I don't know. And then kind of become an expert on it and post something tomorrow about the history of Cat Power, and I'm an expert now. So it's just that's all so accelerated that it's kind of meaningless. So I mean, that's why I started trying to take these musics and edit them together and make a new thing out of them. It's like letting it pass through me in a different way.
Yeah. So you talked about how people can become like immediate experts on things, and then that like kind of devalues it, right? So, I mean, or that's how I took it.
Mm-hmm.
I took it on the idea that like if it's that available, right, then it somehow for me is this kind of like false sense of expertise, right? It's like this kind of superficial, but broad-based, and and I read something this morning where it was probably someone who makes their living as a consultant or something, but it said like if it takes me 30 minutes to do something, but I can do it in 30 minutes because of the 10 years that I spent learning how to do this, then I should be compensated based on the years, not the minutes, right? And so I was thinking about that, and my perspective is that if someone spent a long time thinking about something and working on something, I'm more interested in their opinion than someone who, has the capacity to download all of Cat Powers in an hour or 10 minutes and then have an opinion about it. What do you think about that? I mean, it's kind of tied to the idea of connoisseurship, right? Or expertise.
Well, on the one hand, you can say, I'm tempted to say that person, why not? Maybe they are an expert now. I don't want to make expertise some I kind of hate the idea of expertise and of amateur versus professional. And, I like the idea that art is the place where the category of amateur and professional really doesn't have any meaning anymore. And
that's
so
where I was going.
Maybe that person is an expert on cat power. Fine. I'd rather say that and devalue the idea of expertise than kind of like pull my hair out about, how anybody can be an expert now, because fuck that.
Right. So devaluing the idea of expertise, like what's the benefit of that? Is it that it lets more people in? Is it that it makes it more open? Or is
Well, I mean, I'll keep, just in terms of art, I think professional and amateur doesn't really have a place. I think you can be you can have a kind of professional level of technical skill at something particular, lithography or something.
Yeah.
I'm not denying that, but that's not what makes art interesting for me, right? I mean, with painting, it seems like on the one hand, you have to take responsibility for something because there's nothing that you must do. When you must do something, it's a way of avoiding responsibility, right? Like fascism comes out of wanting to be led.
Yeah.
But and then on the other hand, with painting, it seems to me that it's also of the utmost importance somehow not to care, because if you care too much, I don't know, it's going to fuck up the painting. As far as I'm concerned, the things that I like, there's a feeling of, I don't know where I'm going with that. And I don't remember where the path started. What was the question?
Well, I'm intentionally asking you these questions because this is my line of thinking on your painting. And so this is what I'm curious about. So when you're making your paintings, are you certain about what's going to happen? Like, what's your level of certainty, or even interest in being certain?
Yeah, well, right. I don't think much knowledge about that or interest in that. No, it's, I don't think making these things that you're calling paintings, which they are, I mean, they're wall hanging
I'm following
images,
you.
blah, blah, blah. But I don't think that's different from making anything else. I think it's always, just started thinking about this recently, maybe kind of like hitting middle age and wondering, wait, what am I doing? What is this? What am I doing? Maybe I'm not doing anything. That'd be scary. But trying to understand that process of making, and it comes out of a kind of, the work comes out of a kind of way of thinking and experimenting and testing, and it's produced by that. Mm-hmm. And it's not about making the thing that is the one thing. And I think you can make a painting. It seems like some people make paintings that way, and that has a certain clarity to it. I admire that. I think that I'm testing and testing a lot of different approaches and materials, and that's why sometimes the art would take the form of, a line of clothing, and sometimes it might take the form of something you can hang on the wall. But it just starts out as testing materials and ideas, and so no, I don't know where it's going.
So are you attached to what happens?
You mean once it's done, or?
And the process too, so, because that's one of the things I've been thinking about, is this idea of like kind of being open, right? And all these things for me are sort of circling around back to that. And so this idea of being attached to the process, or being attached to the outcome, or attached to anything. And
no, I think like non-attachment, absolutely. And also defocused thinking, defocused mind. I was just having to kind of explain almost apologetically to some people who work with me in the studio that I often am kind of drifting around doing a lot of different things, and it doesn't look like I'm doing much of anything. And I had realized just over the course of the summer and the fall, that's where I'm doing a lot of thinking. Something will suddenly come out of that. I'm picking up material and cutting it up, and then I just walk over and do a sketch, or then I'm just kind of on the internet, and then I'm reading something, and it's pretty distracted, or distracted looking. It is distracted. It's kind of a defocused way of working and thinking, but I don't want to be interrupted, because then it all falls apart. It is a way of trying to circle around and make myself available for an impulse or something. But yeah, there is non-attachment. Once I'm not attached to the result or even to the piece, really. It's hard for me to hold on to these things very tightly.
So I'm super interested in that idea, because I haven't thought about it in that way or heard about it in that way, this, like the defocused, because what you're describing sort of sounds like what I have known to be described as like being in the flow, but you're almost describing it as like the opposite of that. Does that resonate for you?
Yeah, I think so. Say more.
So I first understood the idea of like flow state or being in the flow, like skiing, right? And so often for me, it happens like when I'm physically moving, or being in nature, and I can pinpoint it back to skiing, which is something that I traditionally have to really pay attention when I'm doing, because I don't think I'm that good. I mean, I think I've been told that I'm better than I think I am, but I've historically really concentrated on it. And then a few times when I sort of stopped thinking about it and just did it, then it was like floating,
Yeah,
or,
right.
and so it has like a mental but physical kind of sensation too. And, but I'm sort of hearing about that as I'm thinking about you and having been in your studio and understanding what it would mean for you to like move from one place to the other and pick things up and put them down. And I'm curious about that process, right?
Yeah, I'm not putting my shoulder to the wheel and like trying to sketch out the archaeological dig and then proceed methodically. It's I think I've tried that over the years, and it's counterproductive for me.
So, but it's also like, that's how I've explained like being in the Met, for example, like where you're intending to go and look at, say, an exhibition of modernism, but then you see like armor, and you're like, hey, I'm going to just go over there and like check out a couple of pieces, or, where you sort of allow yourself to, I don't know, have an expanded viewpoint, right? So that things kind of can catch your attention and take you over there, right? Or that's what like reading the newspaper used to be, when you would kind of flip through, right? Like that physicality of like allowing your mind to sort of be, it's almost like your eyes are sort of half open, So there is a filter. It's not like there's not a filter. You're not talking about like a totally unaware state. You're talking about like something that's open. Right?
It's open. Yeah, absolutely. I think for me to be open means to be able to float, and that means having space and time to float. And everything in this culture militates against that. The one that you and I are in, here in New York City and in the West, in the social media culture, in kind of capitalist culture. So that's like a luxury to be able to do that. To kind of like carve out that space and time.
So, and you were talking about it with your assistants because they like wanted your attention? Or
yeah, I realized I had to be fair to tell people around me, like, I'm sorry, this is the way I work, and it doesn't look like much. It looks like I'm just kind of wandering around, like scratching my head or something. But actually, I'm trying to put myself in a place where I can follow my interests. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm interested in. I guess that was sort of my first question too. Is, it's like, what do you think about? So
I like to float.
yeah.
Yeah.
A few years ago, I said to like our curatorial staff at the museum, they were putting forth shows, and I don't know, they just weren't very interesting, and I said, like, I want to know like what you're really interested in. Like, when you can't sleep in the middle of the night, like, what do you get up and Google? Like, what are you kind of like secretly obsessed with that wouldn't want anyone to know that you are focused on, right? Like that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in those things that, like, you don't really even know why you're interested in them, but they just kind of keep coming back up for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, like, do a show about that.
How'd that work out?
Well, better in terms of like the generation of ideas. And I am like, if I was to be asked a question about like what makes me like most sad in the world, I would say that it is like a profound lack of curiosity in so many people that I interact with. And like, if I could do one thing to make the world better, it would be to help people somehow be more curious. And I feel like art can do that. And
I wonder if curator comes out of the same.
Maybe, maybe.
Or if it's more like curare. Isn't that like that poison you dip your arrow in?
Yeah. I mean, they're both good, right? So, I mean, it was good to try and like push, in that way. And interestingly, I've worked with like high school students that, have like to help them, like train them to be curators kind of. And somehow in the last few years, they've been a little more receptive to this and they've gotten better. But like a few years ago, it was probably at its lowest. But that's kind of one of my meters for the health of society, is like how curious people are. So, and in this one instance that I'm thinking about, like what the person was interested in was interesting, but then when they tried to make it into a show, it wasn't a very good show. Like maybe it was, but it was a good exercise,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm interested in things that fail as much as in things when things succeed.
Yeah.
I mean, I like imperfection.
Yeah.
I think it's somehow more true, but I also like truth. So.
Yeah.
So,
Listen to that rain.
it's kind of amazing, right? So, when you've made fashion, or let's talk about that specifically. Mm-hmm. What were you interested in when you did that? What were your hopes around that?
I'm trying to think. Well, I think in like 2010 or so, I just had started to notice kind of like all this kind of upswing and attention around street style and hashtag menswear and all this crap. And that was interesting to me. And how did it happen? I think, well, Tim Hamilton, this designer, had asked me to do a video for a presentation of his, and that wasn't interesting to me. But then I thought, well, making clothes might be interesting. I'm interested in making things, and I don't know anything about this. I wasn't thinking of it as art yet, mm-hmm. So I met with him, and then at the same time, this is in 2011, early 11 maybe, I was trying to think of what to do for Documenta in 2012, a year later. And Carolyn Christoph Bakarjev was basically asking me, what's your spring summer 2012 collection going to be? It kind of hit me that I was working with all these kind of garment patterns and talking to Tim about it. And I thought, well, I guess I could just kind of collapse that. And at the same time, separately, for some years then, I'd been interested in envelopes. I don't know why, but something about this idea that you take a flat, two-dimensional, square piece of paper, a rectangular piece of paper, and through a little folding and adhesive, suddenly you go from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions, and now you have a box, basically. And then into that box, you put another folded piece of paper. And I don't know what to do with that, but something about it was just kind of was tickling me. And so I started making my own envelopes and then ripping them apart and scanning that and then thinking about liner patterns and collecting envelopes. And then when I started working on garment production and thinking about how garments are made, it was very similar, because a jacket is a square, flat piece of material that's then folded to contain something, and jackets have liner patterns. And then somehow it all just kind of came together, and in, let's see, fall of 2011, we did a menswear presentation for New York Fashion Week. Rented a store, kind of an empty storefront below Canal Street. And that turned into eventually a whole bunch of sculptures and, a clothing line for Documenta.
Which I saw and was at the fashion presentation or the
Oh, you were? Oh, cool.
Yeah,
Great.
I was there. Yeah. But it's so interesting because, I knew about the envelopes and whatever, but I never thought about the idea of like, and I think a lot about wrappers. Like that's one of the things that I'm interested in.
Like
is
Young Thug and like Future.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, with just an R and also with a W. But I hadn't really thought about this idea of like layering and this like the thing that's like inserted in something else. I think more about like the exterior than like about what's inserted. So, and that's interesting to think about like jacket, shirt, jacket. That's, yeah. So I guess what I should say is I've been more interested like in the container, right?
Well, it was a way to, in that context, in the context of art, what's printed on the liner became, for I think some people who looked at it, the content.
Yeah.
Both because it was literally the contents of this jacket or envelope soft sculpture made out of fabric. You open it up and there it is, but also because the white canvas of the trench coat or of this sculpture on the wall, the white canvas is blank. It doesn't give you much. It's the blank canvas. And then on the inside, they were like, oh, look at these patterns. Mm-hmm. And that was something to talk about, mm-hmm. Especially if it goes into the realm of language with repeated words or, yeah. But at the same time, it was, in a way, it was more, for me, sometimes it felt like it was more blank. There's less information to the right. Repeated pattern than there is in this construction of the garment around it.
So I mentioned when I arrived that I was just, having dinner with Peter Fischley in Zurich, and he at dinner was describing a story that you wrote or an essay, and he described really the narrative, and I haven't read it, so I need to do that. But he said it was, about an artist. And then maybe it was you, but maybe it wasn't you. And...
Oh, it was this novel.
Okay. So can you talk a little bit about that?
About that book?
Yeah.
Fuck Seth Price.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what it's called. I'm like, should I say it? What could I tell you about it?
I mean, I guess I'm interested in asking you what the narrative is, since I just heard Peter kind of describe what he thought the narrative was.
Yeah, it's like about let's see, in 2013 or something, I wanted to write something in a more serious, focused way. I've written essays over the years, but it's really hard to clear that space and time again to do something in a focused way. I mean, it felt like I'm going to take off a year basically to learn a new skill.
Is that what you did?
Yeah. Yeah. Like let go the person who's working for me and said no to a whole bunch of exhibitions and just was kind of reporting for duty to like a room to try to sit down and write something, reading a lot of fiction. Got into autofiction as it was, being called. Anyway, at the end of the year, I had this book. So but it's fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what happens in it?
Oh man, I don't know. You'll have to read it. It starts with a painter having some issues.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's not a really good narrative. Like honestly, it's.
Well, so the way Peter described it, it ends in a way where, the way Peter describes it, I have been thinking a lot about Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey, and how most, pretty much all Hollywood films, and most all of Western mythology, is kind of the same story, where you head out into the wilderness, however you define that, right, in search of something. And then there's, your burning of the boats moment, right, where you say no to...
The burning of the boats moment?
The burning of the boats moment, yeah. So, where you basically, like, deny wherever you were before and any
like kick down the ladder kind of thing?
And just, I could tell you, like, my story, right, using the hero's journey. And my burning of the boats moment was, when I was in college and told my parents I wasn't going to law school. And that I was going to try and pursue a moment of art. And, and then, you head off and you're the furthest away from home, and they're adversaries and then they're guides, and then you get this knowledge and then you return home a changed person and hopefully you share it. So I've been thinking a lot about that as it applies to my life and everyone else's, lives. But some people are more aware of it, some people are less. But as he was describing the narrative of your story at the end, or the narrative of your novel, at the end, what he said is that basically the character, the protagonist, comes back around to, there being nothing left to do but look at the paintings. But that was a good thing. And so I was curious about that.
That's how Peter interpreted it, huh?
Yeah.
That's very interesting. Okay, Peter.
Yeah. So that there was like, that there was a journey and, that there was like a denial of, the past and then a catharsis and then a return. So the hero's journey is about the return.
Okay. Do you know about this other narrative form, which I'm trying to, I hope you do, because I can't really remember it, but I had read about this circular narrative as a pattern that was, I think, an ancient pattern, and even before what we know of as the novel had kind of congealed. I think there were many circular narratives in folklore and things, where, if I'm remembering correctly, it starts more or less in the middle and then kind of circles around to another part and then back again. And then I like kind of read something about this and then never like followed up on it, and I have no idea what I'm talking about, but it's in the back of my head somewhere.
Huh. So I don't know specifically about that, but I think the art of storytelling is something I've been thinking a lot about, and how exhibition making is a type of storytelling.
Yeah.
And what kind of relationships can be made between exhibition making as a form of storytelling and other forms of storytelling. So I think what you're talking about is almost like the oral tradition, right? Where people, kind of stood around a campfire, or not a campfire, but like whatever the hearth was, right? In the society where people, had warmth and food and community. And that's how they would understand who they are, right? And that's how they would communicate to their community, both elders, right, and youngers.
Do you think about exhibition making in those terms? Mm-hmm. I remember this curator once told me, we were putting together a show, and he said, you have about 8 seconds to grab their attention when they come through that door in that first room. And like, it was basically, there's the cold open in documentaries. They talk about you just jump in the story because you got to get people's attention so they don't flip the channel.
Exactly.
And I wonder, that's like this, is that like the circular idea? I almost don't want to say it, but like, that's like you jump in, you grab their attention, and then you can like back up a little bit.
That's right.
And then you go forward again. Like, it's not in fact like quite so much about like beginning, middle, and end, or you're going to just lose them.
That's exactly right. And for me, that's also how I pretty much only read fiction for pleasure. I read a ton of nonfiction, like for work or whatever. So, and for me, it's the first 5 words of any novel. And if I'm not good and really like if I haven't been captured in the first 5 words, boat. Done, right? Yeah. So, but yeah, that's how I think about it too. And it's true. And actually viewing an exhibition is a circular thing too, but you have to kind of have a plunge, So
plunge, plunge pool.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think a lot of people don't do it that way. But I think there's a real art to exhibition making.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Let's do it next month.
Exactly. Well, that's what I do when, like I'm standing around and looking at it from all these different angles, because like the weakest part is always like where things can fall apart, right?
I want to see you like burn the boats when we get into that, when we start hanging the show.
So talk, if you would, about the skin works.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know, I want to hear a little bit about like the mechanics of them, like
of making them.
Skin,
yeah, sure.
And yeah,
whose
and the
skin,
how, and yeah,
and the how.
Mm-hmm.
You want me to do beginning, middle, and end storytelling?
I kind of do.
All right. I guess 2015, or maybe in 14. Actually, the funny thing is, when I wrote that book, that novel, there's a part in it when this protagonist is thinking a lot about skins in the way that we talk about skins for apps and switchable phone covers and skins in video games. This kind of fluidity of 3D rendering, and I think maybe I started thinking about skins in that context, and then but immediately skin plunges you into a whole other world, which is very charged, right? Mm-hmm. And there's something, I guess I didn't know where I was going with it, but I was interested in the idea that skin is totally familiar and banal. Mm-hmm. Therefore, for everybody in the world has skin, but at the same time, it's totally charged and full of meaning. It's like empty and full at the same time. Mm-hmm. And if you look at your forearm, there's a lot of information, right? And if you want to talk about it in contemporary terms, there's a lot of data. If you were to take an image, mm-hmm. but at the same time, there's very little. There's a lot there, and there's also it becomes kind of bland and abstract. Mm-hmm. So this was all interesting to me. Mm-hmm. And then I was thinking about human skin is the skin of a human. It's a person, so it's a portrait. It's very intimate, but it's also anonymous if you decontextualize it. So it's both again, and it's humans, so it's beautiful, and there's also something repulsive if you think about, it's like body parts. It's if you go in, you're looking at pores and sweat and hairs and things that make people uncomfortable. But that's all stuff that's also in a different context can be fascinating and sexy and beautiful. So all these kind of things that pull in two directions at once, that's something I'm interested in general, or that's a clinical way of saying it, interested in it. Just it's like a hot spot for me in terms of like, it's pulling me in that direction.
Yeah.
With these early vacuum forms with the body parts in plastic, there's something that's ugly about them. And I remember people at the time thinking they were quite ugly. And then there's something also beautiful and classical about it. And I think over time they became a little more classical and less ugly and less kind of brutal in terms of, a fist or a breast in plastic. And I like that pulling in both directions. And I guess I keep on coming back to again and again to the body in my work, although it's not such an overt theme that people talk about it, but it's in work after work over the years. So I think there's something there. So I was thinking about skin, and at the same time, again, I was thinking about material and materiality, which it's like with the fashion show. I was thinking about a bunch of different things at once, and the materiality of clothing and putting things together and playing with all these different fabric scraps and trim and buckles and zippers. And at the same time, I had this other thing in my mind about envelopes. And in this case, I was thinking around skin somehow. And at the same time, I was thinking a lot about printing and printing technology and substrates. And I was looking at images reproduced in the city as I walk around on the sides of buses, and now, 100 feet tall on the side of buildings. And they're everywhere. But when you walk up close, they fall apart into total garbage because it's low resolution. And it doesn't have to be, it can afford to look like shit when you're a foot away. It doesn't care.
Right.
And I started thinking about art world images, which are often quite high res, very beautiful, but they're relatively small. And I was thinking about, well, you could probably make a large scale image with a lot of data, with a lot of resolution. That's just like a data crunching issue, right? Like, why can't we just do that? But I haven't seen that, and I'd like to see that. So, and then somehow at one point I thought, oh, right, skin has all the data that I'm thinking about. And so then I thought, well, maybe I'll try to take these first I thought, oh, I'll just scan it. But in fact, a flatbed scanner is not made for this for a bunch of reasons I won't go into, but you can't get the image I was looking for. And then I thought there must be a walk-in scanner for video games or something, and that doesn't have the resolution. And then I thought, okay, I'll hire a photographer, which I did, who had he had a $50,000 camera he owned or rented or something, and brought it to the studio, and we hired models and tried to make that work for a couple of weeks, and it wasn't it. And eventually, after a couple months, we found these engineers who had a startup in California outside San Fran that had invented this kind of computer-controlled rig with a robot arm and a camera that they were using to shoot still objects. And they had just developed this tool, and they were basically hoping somebody would come along and buy it, or that the government would decide to use it for all of their whatever, bullet forensics or who knows. And so they were kind of sitting around, and I came over and trained on it and then rented it, and they shipped it out to New York to the studio. And we had to put it together. It took a week or two to figure it all out. They had this kind of custom built computer set up with a whole bunch of different software packages to put the image together. And then we advertised for models on Craigslist at first. That was a kind of gnarly process because it turned out if you're asking people need to lie down under the machine for 6 hours or so, because it takes, if you're taking a photographs of a patch of skin that's like 8 inches by 3 inches. It's taking, I don't know, 30,000 photographs or something.
Amazing.
And then it squashes those all together through the software processing we would do. It would take like a week into this nice seamless image. It basically does what Google Maps does by taking photographs of terrain and stitching them together and ironing out the problems and taking care of redundancies. And then we hired a fashion retoucher to go through and kind of like do the final like sharpening of that motherfucker so we could print it. And then that's the process. The models, we were advertising for, I'm trying to get the wording. It didn't work at first. We kept on getting people who were kind of, well, I realized it sounded worrisome. We were advertising for people to sit for 6 hours so we could take photographs of a small portion of their skin, age, race, and gender, not important. And it just sounded shady. I can't remember. We ended up tweaking the language and ultimately getting some people. And then I also was looking out on top of that for, I wanted like somebody who had been surfing who was in their 40s, because I wanted somebody who, we were getting people in their 20s and their skin is just so much like, has seen like less wear and tear. And I thought, okay, like nobody's applying who's like a little bit older. And let's just make it a surfer or something so that we get like some sun damage and some like, some little like scars. And we got that. We got this guy who was great. Bob was awesome. Total surfer.
Okay, let's talk about our show.
Okay.
So, how are you thinking about it? How are you describing it?
Well, I'm describing it when people ask about it as it's a show that you put together. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously we're working on it together, but impetus came from you. Mm-hmm. You were interested in the hand in my work because it's there, but it is maybe overlooked because people talk about materials and distribution and ideas and whatever. And that you've put together works from about 10 years ago, roughly, more or less, these knot paintings with some more recent works from the last couple of years. And I think I hadn't thought about those works in relation to each other until this, but there are a lot of weird correspondences and echoes. And the name of the show, No Technique, I don't know. That's part of it, I guess.
I think so.
Have you seen this draft of the poster that I was working on? Or maybe, I don't know if we sent it around.
I haven't seen it yet.
Okay.
I know that it's happening, but I haven't seen it. Okay. So talk a little bit about the knot works. So, and describe for our listener what they look like.
Well, they are plastic relief surfaces. They're vacuum formed. It's a technique I've used for, I haven't now for a while, but I was using it in 2004 through 2010 or something like that. And vacuum forming is an industrial process that I think dates back to after World War II. It essentially, the small scale version is you would take a sheet of plastic, heat it up, and you can actually do this. You can take a very small sheet of plastic, heat it up with something like a hair dryer until it gets soft, and then suck it down around an object. So the way to do it without a vacuum is to thermoform it, which is to heat it up and then mold it around something like you could mold it around your fist. It might be a little hot, but you get an impression of your fist. It's basically a kind of printmaking technique. And when you add the vacuum into the molding, it means that, to use our example, you would heat up the plastic, put your fist down on a bed, a piece of steel that has a lot of holes in it, and the holes are sucking air down like a vacuum cleaner. So it is not just molding the plastic, it's actively sucking it down around your fist. So you get a much better impression of your fist. And on a larger scale, people use that process to make plastic packaging for like a toothbrush or a box of chocolates or a bottle of cologne that comes in a little plastic bed that's exactly shaped for that bottle of cologne. And even in larger applications like the plastic kind of glowing tops of taxis where the advertisements go are made in a similar process. It's a very thick piece of plastic that is sucked down around a mold the size of that little taxi top. And then you get this piece of plastic that is perfect for the size and shape. And I started doing this forming and molding process around casts of human body parts for my first show at Rena Spaulding's. And then I moved on to, I did a large flower, I did masks, I did a bomber jacket. And then the problem is I would have to cast all these objects, which is this laborious, annoying process, because you can't put an actual bomber jacket or item of clothing into the press, because the pressure and the heat and the suction would completely flatten it out. You'd lose all definition. You'd get like a blob. Mm-hmm. So if you want to have this nice bomber jacket, you have to go through this process. It turns out I had to kind of teach myself this stuff in the studio. Just take the bomber jacket, cut off the back so it lies entirely flat. It's already just a relief of a jacket. Build it a little cardboard bed with walls. Paint it carefully with resin to make the surface entirely hard, including if you want, the zipper or any wrinkles, you have to paint under the zipper, you have to paint under the wrinkles. You have to fill in any areas that have an undercut. You have to kind of like fill that in with resin so that the general form of the thing is more like a pyramid without any edges. Then you have to pour this molding compound over the top, wait till it cures, peel it off, turn it over, and then you pour into that plaster or concrete or whatever you're going to make your mold out of. I tried plaster at first, took it to the vacuum forming machine, and the pressure cracked all the edges. So then I had to go back and fill it with resin. And finally, the resin worked, and I was able to make a cast, but this just sucked. I thought like there's no way to improvise or something. So I started throwing ropes into the bed of the machine, because you could just go there and throw them on there and get a cast, an impression. It doesn't matter if the rope gets singed at the edge or if it falls out. Like, who gives a shit about a rope? Yeah. You'll use another rope next time. I couldn't actually do it myself because I was barely allowed on the factory floor. They kind of made an exception, but they certainly weren't allow me to reach into the machine, which is like this insane 19th century gasoline-powered like giant, kind of like shuddering like giant carousel, like suddenly swinging around and missing your head, and 12-foot trench. It takes 5 hours to heat it up and power it up. So I was actually happy not to be reaching in there. So the guy who operated the machine was responsible for all the tosses. The rope toss. Yeah.
Interesting.
So anyway, you get these impressions of rope.
Yeah.
And then at a certain point, I realized I could use transparent plastic and then paint on the front and the back, or I could pre-print the plastic, and you'd get this print on the front, which then gets deformed by the rope. And then you can hang it up in your studio and paint the back in the clear areas, and then you can mount that on a printed piece of gator foam or over fabric. So you have a lot of layers to play with.
Yeah.
And it was like slowly over by like 2010 or something, I'd kind of backed into, I guess, what you could call painting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we were working on the installation with the models, we were making these different relationships between the works, which were largely formal. There were colors that we saw kind of repeating themselves, or forms, or we were looking for kind of pattern and variation. And are those things that you were thinking about when you were making them, or is that something that happens like in the exhibition making? Rather than the objects making? Yeah.
What do you mean?
Yeah.
I think I was just testing things. There was a time when I was doing tiny freehand sketches with a pencil and then scanning them, from a 2-inch by 3-inch sketch would become like an 8-foot tall print, and with all the kind of irregularities and the texture of the paper, and so that formed one group of work. And then at the end there in 2000 and whatever it was, I was already into this pattern and envelope and fabric, and so some of those pieces have printed fabric behind them that would later show up in the envelope series. It was whatever was kind of passing through my head or my studio at the moment I was doing those works.
Yeah.
And there's also a kind of delay because I had to do the vacuum forming portion at the schedule that the factory wanted, because they don't like to work with artists. They barely wanted to work with me. For them, artist means you can't pay. You're annoying, like this annoying fly around their heads while they're trying to like do their work. You don't really know what the outcome's going to be. They like predictability. There are a lot of reasons they didn't really want to do it. They kind of, as a favor, this guy like squeezed me in or something.
Yeah.
So I had to form all the pieces. So I had printed a whole bunch of random stuff and then formed everything. And then I had months to play around with these formed plastic surfaces, by which time like maybe my interest was somewhere else.
Yeah.
And then, painting on the back of it comes out of a different set of concerns. And then mounting it a year later on another substrate comes out of a different set of concerns.
Yeah. 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 And I think that's where the interest in exhibition making comes to, because it's an opportunity to kind of step back and look at everything that was done, in the moment, right, and relationally, and then figure out like, oh, what were some of these kind of intentional or unintentional elements that happened again and again, and so then is there a new story to tell that maybe had always been there but not acknowledged, or maybe hadn't been there but now with the opportunity of distance, right? Appears. So, and the new paintings that are in the show, I remember seeing some of them here, and just, I don't know, kind of having my mind blown, honestly. Like I stopped by the opening and I think I was like, I really wanted to see the show, but I had to be somewhere else. And it just like stopped me, like I had an intended course of my evening, and associated time allowed for everything. And then I got here and I was like, what are these? Like, what is happening here? And that's, yeah. And I'd looked at the book of the rope works, and I'd been looking at some of the skin works, and I'm still not totally sure what's happening there. And that's what turns me on. That's what gets me like super excited about them.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that, because that was on my mind, was trying to make these objects where it wasn't clear how they were made, and it's not clear what they are, what they
or
depict,
what you're
looking at.
Yeah.
I mean,
and the why.
That interests me too.
Yeah.
I mean, there were materials that were interesting to me that caught me somehow, and there were the contents, the imagery caught me somehow, and yeah, I think thinking about this title, No Technique, for the show, I mean, I don't like to highlight the techniques. Mm-hmm. Actually, there's a lot of technique in the work, and sometimes I'm afraid that it's too intoxicating for me. Mm-hmm. And that's maybe why important for me to not make it available to people. Like the calendar paintings, you know, to this day, people think I downloaded them or scanned them from somewhere. There's this, you know, and in fact, I made every part of it.
Yeah.
You know, and that's sometimes surprising, but it, you know, that was something that I didn't want to kind of talk about. Or like the silhouette pieces, you know, I think people assumed that this is a material that existed in the world that you can buy, this kind of like rare wood veneer behind acrylic. But no, this is like a long R&D process to make it something that just looks like it always existed. Because I don't want it to be about, you know, these like skin light boxes. I don't want to like talk in the, you know, in the title date medium about like how it was a computer controlled drone camera or something. Like that's just beside the point.
Yeah.
And in these paintings, I don't want it to be all about the process. I'd rather have it be this thing that suddenly shows up where you're just like, what the fuck am I looking at? Yeah. Right.
That was exactly my experience. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it kind of circles back to where our conversation started too. Like, I like things that I don't understand. I like kind of being uncomfortable, right? That's why, you know, I didn't mind the turbulence yesterday or the rain today, you know?
Yeah, it's like a new experience, right?
Yeah, it makes you feel alive, you know? And I think somehow it's all connected. Somehow the idea of maybe making space to, so I recently learned this term, cottywomple. Do you know it?
Cottywomple?
Yeah.
It's like something to do with like burning boats.
It's related, probably. So it's an old English term, and the idea is to move purposely towards an unknown destination.
Uh-huh.
And there's...
But with purpose?
With purpose.
Huh. Cottywomple?
Cottywomple. And the idea that I like about it is, you know, not being attached to where you're going to end up, but like moving with purpose and intention through the present.
That's an interesting word. Well, it seems like, you know, I don't like, this is maybe left field a little bit, but I realized I can't stand quantification, especially abstract quantification. And partly my brain doesn't work that way. I don't have a head for calendars, or schedules, dates, for money amounts. It's like way over my head. And there's something about, you know, value, therefore, like that. I think it makes me very uncomfortable to be assigned value. And I don't only mean monetary value as an artist. I mean, that also kind of can be very, of course, strange for an artist, but even just value in a critical sense, art historical sense, meaning, that you're being written into something. And I'm not alone in this. I think a lot of artists probably have an issue with this, but the idea that things will be used and made useful is, you know, it somehow seems linked to the idea that, you know, profitability comes out of predictability, right? The more that you can predict a behavior, the more money you can make from it. And therefore, the more things start to repeat themselves and have a certain similarity, the more they can be rewarded. What does this have to do with cottywomble? What was it called?
Cottywomple.
Cottywomple?
Yeah.
It just sounds like a nun's wimple and a like codpiece, kind of like jammed up together in like the fetish museum.
Exactly. It does sound like that. But the idea is yeah, to be comfortable with the uncertainty, I mean, to just be like fully present, and, moving towards an uncertain outcome, or being unattached to wherever it ends up.
Sounds good. Sounds like some, honestly, it's like on the wall in the green tea coffee shop. Just saying.
That's the definition.
No, like moving purposefully towards uncertainty.
Yeah. Well, it's, I'll send you the exact definition, but I'm pretty sure it's, purposely moving towards an unknown destination or something like that. So, which is kind of cool. The thing I like about it also is that, like, I don't know. So oftentimes if people like don't know where they're going, like they'll go slowly. So circling back to like skiing or hiking or whatever, it's like, if people don't know like where they're supposed to go, then often they'll like slow everything down.
Right.
Which maybe is prudent, right? But I like the idea of just like going for it.
Yeah.
Just like
true, except
momentum.
I would say that speed is also part of the contemporary mandate, and speed is often the enemy of art.
True, in all those ways. But speed also, for shortened amounts of time, is also, I think, a release.
Yeah.
And a way to kind of get lost. And that also, I think, can relate to your unfocused.
Yeah. Yeah, and all
working.
those not paintings came out of like periods of speed, like a burst of speed when I had to vacuum form all these things, and I wasn't even dropping the ropes. And then there's a slowdown, and then there's a period of speed when I booked this big ventilated painting studio, and then there's a slowdown.
Yeah.
I like all that. I like uneven development.
Yeah. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So I'm not talking about.
Yeah,
like,
and you just make some bullshit, right? Like I'm just like, this piece sucks. And then some other pieces where you thought it sucked and 10 years pass and you're like, oh, that's the good one. Actually, right. That's like the weird one. Right.
I want to ask you maybe just one more question. You were talking earlier about things that you'd like to look at. Like you're talking about like making something that you thought you'd like to see.
Right.
And I just wanted to circle back to that idea because it's kind of beautiful. And I just want to...
I mean, that's like... Yeah, sometimes just, it's like, this is super corny, but just get a picture in my head. And, I was making these calendar paintings, and then suddenly I thought, wouldn't it be cool to have like an ass pushing out through this calendar? And then later I thought like, wait, is this like just some Gober thing I saw? But anyway, it like set me off in the whole vacuum forming journey. And then, the silhouette thing, I thought, I'm going to go get some of that wood behind plastic. I'll just go to the store and get some. And then it turned out that didn't exist. So I had to like make that. And with the light boxes also. Yeah, just like trying to make something happen.
Is it the idea of like, what if this happened? Or
no, it's more like just like this, just getting obsessed with something that pops in your head. Don't even know why. It's not a what if. It's like more stupid than that.
Okay, I think that's the perfect place to end.
All right.
So
thank you, Heidi.
Thank you. Conversations About Art is part of Heidi.art. This episode was produced by Simon Illa. Our theme music was composed by Eric McDougall. Jordan Weisberg is our curatorial associate. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and review us on whichever platform you listened, as it helps us further our goal of connecting all to art. We'll be back again every other Tuesday with new episodes. Thanks for listening.